I have some great HOA stories for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Here's our first one. HOA raising monthly assessments and adding fees despite the fact that we've been under budget by 60 grand plus for the past 2 years by night of knee. So we bought a house in a townhome HOA in Colorado almost a year ago. There's maybe 200 townhomes in total here. I will admit up front that I didn't put in the time or the effort into the HOA when I first moved in, and I missed the quarterly meetings, also because I work late. Here's a brief summary of what they're doing. Effective next week, they're bringing back a parking policy from 2007 that will charge $30 a month or $360 a year per car parked outside of our 2-car parking garages. Bear in mind that there is absolutely no shortage of open parking spots here every day, and the outside parking spots are completely uncovered and unsecured. It's an open community, no gates and no security. We live in a smaller town on the outskirts of Denver. This is the suburbs, not downtown Denver. The townhomes sold here are all 2- and 3-bedroom homes in a commuter neighborhood. The average household has 3 or 4 cars. The parking policy was made in 2007 when the community was built. It's a regulation, but it's not included in our CC&Rs as an article, section, or attachment. The CC&Rs do give the board authority to make regulations, but this regulation was not included in the CC&Rs that we received as new homeowners after 2007. On top of that, this regulation has not been reviewed since 2007, and frankly, it's outdated. Due to the above parking policy, I started looking into our budget. There is no shortage of open parking spots, so I thought there might be a budgetary need for this exorbitant monthly fee. What I found out was that we were over $60,000 under budget in 2017. We're on track to be under budget for about the same in 2018, $61,000 under budget as of August 15th. The surplus funds are being put in a reserve fund that's already over $1 million. This is what they're supposed to do with the surplus fund per our CC&Rs. I'm pretty sure we're so under budget because they will not use this money for the road repairs on the HOA's private property. We're involved in a 4-year-old lawsuit with the builders about the roads, so we cannot fix them with community funds. Despite being under budget for 2017 and 18, they're raising assessments in 19 from an already pricey $185 a month to $190 a month. They're raising monthly fees and adding an exorbitant monthly parking fee when we're tens of thousands under budget. How can they possibly justify raising assessments and or adding this fee? So here's what I've done. I've reached out to the community manager several times since November 15th. All I'm getting in response is, your concerns have been forwarded to the board. I reached out to my neighbors via Nextdoor, and I also went around putting flyers on people's windshields, advising of the upcoming changes and how to complain to the community manager. I know of at least 10 neighbors that complained to the management company, and they've received the same lackadaisical response. We belong to a bigger neighborhood HOA that literally encompasses half of the town, thousands of homes, and I reached out to their manager for any advice on how to proceed with the complaint, as there is no official avenue of complaint in our CC&Rs, and I'm not getting a response from the board. She just said that she doesn't really have any authority to step in. Last night, I emailed our community manager and I requested the contact information for the lawyer for our local community association. No reply yet. So I'm going to submit a complaint to my town's government, though I don't think there's much that they can do. I'm going to submit a complaint to the Division of Real Estate for Colorado, but even they admit that they neither investigate nor enforce, so I'm not sure how helpful that'll be either. If nothing comes from either of those, I'll have to go around the community getting a petition signed, but there's no official petition form or process included in our CC&Rs. How do I make sure that they don't ignore me or us? Any advice on how to proceed here? Anything I'm doing or not doing that could help get an answer? My ultimate goal is to get an emergency HOA meeting scheduled so that we can vote these things down. I've requested that in at least 3 separate emails to the community manager and the management company's general inbox. An update. I did receive an email from the community manager a couple of hours ago, and the board is scheduling an emergency meeting for next week. What would you do if you were OP? No money back? We'll see about that. Posted by Deus Ex Pirate Pete. A few years ago, when my kids were 3 and 7, we were looking for a new car for my wife. After scouring Auto Trader, we're in the UK, We saw a Mazda Z06, decent mileage, couple of owners in a small Trader's down south. It was about an hour away, so we hopped in my car and went to go look at it. We arrived at the site, which had some decent looking cars, and it was a nice and tidy place, so didn't ring any alarm bells. We were greeted by one or two Romanian brothers who seemed knowledgeable and pretty free of the hard sell. I had a look around the car. Very little rust, oil looked clean, tidy inside with not too much wear. The only two things I found was the head unit panel was not in place correctly, and one of the brackets by the engine had a bit of a dent in it, but it was a non-functional bracket and it didn't appear to have a prank, so okay. I took it for a test drive and it was okay. My wife liked it, so we paid part cash, part card. A few days later, after sorting the insurance, we went and collected it. By the time we got home, my wife got out and immediately said, "There's something wrong with this car." I took it for a drive, and yes, it had low power, sounded terrible, and did not feel safe. I immediately rang them, and they were pleasant enough and said bring it back and they would have their garage look at it, the same garage that had MOT'd it barely 2 weeks earlier. I said I didn't want to bring it back and I would pay out of my pocket to get it assessed by my garage. They didn't like this, but I didn't give them a choice. After a couple of days of being at my local garage, who we've used for years and trust, even though they're a bit pricey, we got the report. It ran to 2 pages, which I will summarize using the comment the mechanic gave us when we picked it up. "Mechanically, this is the worst car I have ever seen. How it passed an MOT is beyond me. You wouldn't have seen it on a visual inspection, but this is a nail." Oh dear. So I rang the dealer and sent them the report. Again, pleasant enough, said bring it back and we can discuss it and sort out the refund. Cue the malicious compliance. So, the following Saturday, now 1.5 weeks since we bought it, we all trooped back down there and walked into their little porta-cabin office. The 2 brothers were sat with their faces like slapped bums. "I will tell you now, sir, you will not be getting a refund today, not until our garage has checked it." My wife and I looked at each other and our hearts sank. What followed was an hour of back and forth with me explaining that we were within our rights to a full refund within 30 days of purchase. Now, this is true for goods in the UK, but I had no idea if it applied to vehicles. After an hour, my wife and I stepped outside. The kids were getting bored and fractious. "What are we going to do?" says my wife. "Well, I'm not leaving without a refund," I said. Agreed. And that was it. We went back into that office. We argued back and forth, revisited the same point over and over, while the kids moaned and cried and begged to leave. But we sat there and we argued very calmly, very matter-of-factly, without getting angry or raising our voices. At a couple of points, one brother left to serve people who had walked into the yard, and at one point he came in with another couple who were interested in a car. They heard us talking, and I slyly shook my head at the couple, and they backtracked and left. One of the brothers was raging behind his eyes. They threatened to call the police, and I begged them to do it so we could clear this up and leave. They didn't. After, and I am not exaggerating, 5 hours of this, my wife and I stepped out, and we were stood just outside the office door. "Look, we can't stay here any longer. The kids are hungry and tired and mental," my wife says. I saw the door open, barely an inch. "Okay, take my car and go feed them. I'm not leaving. I think I'll just call the police and get this sorted, but if I have to stay here until tomorrow morning, we are getting our money back," I said. I noticed the door close again. "Really?" she said. "Just give it a minute. Let's go back in a sec." "Okay," she says, looking irritated. We go back in and one brother is counting out cash on the table. At this point, it's early evening. "Sir, the deal we will do is, we will give you a full refund if you don't mention this car on any review site. It was X in cash and X on a card, yes?" Less than 5 minutes later, we were back in our car, leaving the nail behind, cash in hand and card refunded. We had found a pub that does food, and we were heading there rapidly. The kids were okay now that they knew food was near. With everything sorted, my wife and I looked at each other for a second and cheered and whooped, hollered, and banged the steering wheel, making the little lad cry, bless him. We could not believe that after 5 hours of back and forth, crying kids, belligerent salesmen, we had won. We had flipping well won. This sort of thing never happened to us, and yet there we were. We felt like the kings of the world and no one would ever mess with us. Return the car empty? Done. Posted by MA77MC. Talking to my grandmother earlier today reminded me of this story from a number of years ago. I live in Sydney and used to fly up to the Gold Coast around 3 or 4 times a year to check on my grandmother. Now the whole family was in Sydney, so someone would usually pop up once each month to help her out. Anyway, I would always rent a car from Hertz when I arrived. At the time, they offered a prepaid fuel option where you would pay an amount and not need to refuel before return. It was usually less than you would pay at the local service station, so I usually took this option. As I picked up the keys to this shiny new manual Toyota Corolla, the woman said to me, "So you have the prepaid fuel, just bring it back empty." After a few days of relaxing by the beach, I ran a few errands for my grandmother in the morning before my 1500 flight. When the fuel light comes on and the words of Hertz staff ring in my ear, "Bring it back empty." Not wanting to push it, I pulled into 7-Eleven and put 2 liters in and went on my way. The light didn't extinguish, but with the distance I needed to cover, I figured I'd be safe. About 1300, my grandmother is pushing me out the door, telling me to catch my flight, so I make the 6-kilometer trip to the airport, the whole time anxiously wondering if I'll make it with the fuel remaining. As I was coming up on the airport, I felt the engine sputter, but it was still going. Heading in, it started sputtering more, so much so that I genuinely thought that I'd run out mere meters from my destination. As I pulled through the boom gate for rental returns, I put my foot down and got a final burst of acceleration, the car determined to be the little engine that could, my finish line in sight, and the car is gonna make it. Until it didn't. The car stalled. With the momentum, I had pulled it into a spot marked Avis, and it only made it about halfway in. I tried in vain to restart it, but it wasn't to be. I got out and pushed the little engine that could into bay 109. I was 11 bays short of the first marked Hertz, and I was a broken man, my goal so near yet so far. Torment ran through my mind. Did those 11 bays mean that I was short of my goal to bring it back empty? I mean, it was in the rental car park after all, and it wasn't uncommon for people to just, park in a spot and ignore who owns the spot. I walk into the terminal, carry on roller bay in one hand, car keys in the other, and walk up to the rental returns. "Can I help you?" the same young woman asks as I walk up to her. "I'm returning a car," I said. She takes the paperwork and asks where I'd parked it. "Bay 109, it says Avis," I respond, her not looking up. She shrugs and talks into the radio on the counter. "Return 109, she finally says. "Did you fill it up?" I say no, and she asks roughly how much is left. "Well, none," I say. "Oh, so the petrol light is on, no worries," she says. No, I reply. I mean, it ran out of fuel as I drove in. I had to push it into the parking spot." The helpful woman gives me a blank stare for a full 10 seconds. "Wait, you let it run out? You said return it empty, so I accepted your challenge. It seems I win," I said with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The staff member turns to her colleague, points at me, and says, "Prepaid fuel, and he says he ran out in the car park." The guy looks at me with a smirk and says, "Really?" "Well, it wouldn't start back up," I reply as someone comes in from the outside to get the keys. "It's out of fuel," the woman says. "That's okay, I'll run up to Shell after I've washed it," he replies. Both terminal staff look at him as the woman, looking at me, says, "No, the customer says he had to push it into the spot." Cue the largest eyes I've ever seen. I have to see this. He walks out with me, and the guy from behind the counter following behind opens the car and tries to start it. It's cranking, but it won't turn over as all 3 of us burst out laughing. "I've never had one fully out before," he says when I tell him. "The woman in there told me to bring it back empty," as I walk inside, laughing to check my bags. "You can't use a competitor's phone," posted by Mashigakur. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know, I work on cell phone towers. I used to work in an extremely remote rural area for a now defunct small cell phone company. The conversations are to the best of my recollection. The area I worked was the type of area where you could drive for hours and not see anything but field, forest, and animals. Most of the sites I had were what is referred to as island sites, meaning that they don't hand off to another cell tower. And most of these sites were about 30 minutes apart on a good day. Well, I worked nights, but you get the drift. So it came around that a competitor had located quite a few sites near our sites. I, being of the mindset of efficiency, purchased a phone from them, and with approval from my boss, kept it ready, especially during upgrades. But he was the type when anyone above him says, "Boo," he'd jump and ask if he jumped high enough or if he should jump again. So a couple of months later, boss's boss leaves and we get new boss's boss who spent 250% of his life in the confines of New York City. Within his first week, he's working the switch and sees me call in from our competitor's number. Of course, he takes offense to this, and it quickly comes down that nobody may use a competitor's phone. I bring up my concerns, but they don't need to do this in New York City, so we're not going to do this. Mind you, my job is to shut down our sites and upgrade or repair them. Yes, I'm the guy you love to hate when you can't make a phone call. And so it happens a short time later, I'm at one of my most remote sites, a 45-minute drive to the next site on a good day. About 4 hours from home. Now I do my diligence, I call the switch, I tell them what I need them to change and shut down the site. An hour later, the site's not up. So I go through everything on my end. Yep, everything's good. Crap. Now there's a couple of payphones, but they were the competitor's phone. So I start driving. It takes me about an hour and a half to get to the next site because of a freak blizzard. Crap, that site's down too. Roll on to the next site, usually in about 30 minutes, but it's snowing hard and the roads are crap. 2.5 hours on the road after leaving the original site, I finally get service. So I pull over, and in 5 minutes, we figured out the switch crossed a number and took down the wrong site. Switch promises to fix it, and I drive 3 hours back to the original site. 30 minutes later, it's still not up. This time, it takes an hour to get to the closest site, call the switch again, and they get it up after about 30 minutes, and I verify it's up. Hooray! But I still have to drive back, clean up, and make some testing calls. 18 some odd hours after I left my driveway, I pull back in and submit my time, complete with the overtime. It's my Friday, so I turn off my phone and I hit the bed. Monday morning, I turn on my phone for our weekly call-in meeting, and I crap you not, it buzzes with new text and voicemails for 20 straight minutes, all from boss and boss's boss. Well, I jump on the call, and first thing I hear is boss's boss. Why the heck did you have a nearly 9-hour outage for a 30-minute upgrade? Before I get a word in, and how dare you claim 9 hours of overtime where you were clearly freaking around not doing your job? So I tell him, well, there were a series of issues outside of the site and a freak snowstorm slowed my response. I hit send on emails that I had already prepared before clocking out for the weekend with a full rundown of events of the night, as a reply to the emails coming down from him dismissing my needs for a competitor's phone, and included his boss, the vice president of the company. Boss's boss says, I don't want to freaking hear excuses from you. Why didn't you just use a freaking payphone and call for help? Literally everyone on the call groaned. In case you don't remember, I just replied to a series of emails where you forbade me, under threat of termination, from using a competitor's phone. At this point, I hear VP join our call. And since payphones are owned by a competitor, I spent 6 hours driving around in a blizzard searching for service instead of spending 45 minutes to an hour and making a call on a competitor's phone. I never freaking threatened to terminate anyone. Don't be stupid. You could have used a payphone. The VP cuts in. It appears, boss, that you do not remember what you said, and Mr. Kerr has clearly documented his actions on the night in question. Boss, please call me immediately. Thank you everyone else for your time this morning. Please have a good day. This meeting is over. Boss's boss was removed shortly afterwards, having a fairly rocky rest of his short employment. I now work for the company which purchased our competitor. I've moved to my home state, though I still work a rural market, and it's not quite as bad. Sued my HOA. My lawyers destroyed HOA Karen in court. Click the video on your screen so you find out how, and I'll see you there.